Imagine you could speak every language in the world. Not only could you speak each language fluently, but you could pronounce every word with ease. Imagine all of this, and you're only 4 months old. Seem impossible? When children learn language, they start from nothing, and yet by a year, they can ask for objects or family members by name. With this speech, I set out to discover exactly how that happens. Now, I'm not a linguist, but like everyone listening, I learned my first language by listening to the voices of the people who raised me. Since we all have mastered our own language, I hope this speech gives you insight into how you accomplished it. When infants learn language between the ages of 4 and 14 months, they do so in 2 critical stages. The first is learning sounds, and the second is learning words. The first stage in learning language is when infants learn sounds. In the first 6 months, babies learn to decipher the sounds of their native language. There are 2 important concepts to be considered during this stage. The first is phonemes, and the second is what most adults call baby talk. Phonemes are the specific sounds associated with the pronunciation of words in any given language. There are over 800 phonemes in every language around the world, but each specific language only uses about 40 of them when spoken. Let me compare 2 languages, English and Spanish. In English, we have the word mirror. The double R in the middle of the word and the singular R at the end of the word constitute the same sound, just But in Spanish, the double R pronounces a different sound, like in the word guitarra. Some adults who grew up speaking English can't roll their tongue like those who grew up speaking Spanish. Not because those who grew up speaking English have a weak tongue, but because unlike Spanish, English doesn't have a double R phoneme, so as infants, they didn't grow to have the capability to roll their tongue. To learn the phonemes or sounds of their native language, infants listen closely to the conversations around them. But when those conversations are directed to the baby, most adults slip into what we call baby talk. There have been many studies done to analyze how baby talk affects language learning. One such study was done by Patricia Kuhl, a professor and co-director at the Institute of Learning and Brain Sciences at the University of Washington. Kuhl and her colleagues monitored 30 mothers across 3 different countries. Each country had their own distinct language, but there seemed to be one commonality between every mother and child pair. Each mother spoke with a higher pitch, exaggerated tones, and a slower rate of speaking. These 3 characteristics are what are most considered when talking about baby talk. To explore the concept of baby talk, I spoke with my cousin Amanda Hine, a mother of 2, an elementary school art teacher, and a freelance blogger on all topics of early childhood development. Much like the 1997 study of Kuhl and her colleagues, Amanda said that her and her husband used a lot of the same ways of talking. They used a higher pitch, they stretched out the sounds of different words, and they spoke slower. Amanda said she did a lot of narrating of her son's environments, and sometimes she did this in song. When she would sing about the bird flying around the backyard to her sons, she would be unintentionally replicating the results of Kuhl's study. She would be singing in a higher pitch, she would be stretching out words, and, much like most music, when the words are sung instead of spoken, they come out a lot slower. Baby talk stresses the phonemes that babies learn to use in their native language. It helps them choose which phonemes to use and which phonemes to lose. Once infants learn how his or her native language sounds, they begin to carve out exactly what they're hearing. The second stage in learning language is when infants learn words. Studies have shown that infants around 8 months use 2 ways of learning to decipher what words mean. The first is statistical learning, and the second is socialization. An important discovery was made in the 1990s by Jenna Safran, Richard Aslin, and Elsa Newport of University of Wisconsin-Madison, University of Rochester, and Georgetown University, respectively. They were the first to discover that babies use statistical learning when learning language. Statistical learning is the ability of humans to pick up on the statistical regularities around their environment. They learn that when one sound is made, it's very likely that only a select few other sounds will follow. Let's take the words pretty baby, for example. At 8 months, babies can recognize that the sounds pr and t typically follow and precede one another. So instead of hearing it as pr, t, b, they have used statistical learning to negotiate that pretty and baby are two separate words. In addition to learning the boundaries of words, socialization has a great impact on learning language and attaching meaning to words. To illustrate, the researcher mentioned earlier, Patricia Kuhl, monitored 3 groups of 9-month-old infants. They were all raised in English-speaking homes. The first group of infants had face-to-face interaction with a Mandarin speaker who read books and played games with them. The second group watched a Mandarin speaker on TV, but didn't have any interaction with them. And the third group had no interaction with a Mandarin speaker at all. At the end of the 1-month study, only the babies who had face-to-face interaction with a Mandarin speaker showed any recognition of Mandarin words at all, thus proving that socialization is a vital step in learning a language. Returning to my cousin Amanda, she gave me a great example of how socialization affects how babies attach meaning to words. While she said her sons didn't speak their first words until 10 months, they were able to ask for things at 6 months. How? Sign language. When her boys were 4 months old, Amanda taught them the sign for milk. Every time she would bring out a bottle, she would use a sign for milk. She did the same with mom and dad. Through this socialization and interaction, her boys at 6 months were able to ask for milk, mom, and dad, fully understanding what they were asking for. By 8 and 9 months, they were even able to string words together. Words like more milk and all done. To conclude, language learning is a very complex process that happens in 2 early stages. The first, learning sounds, and the second, learning words. There are over 800 phonemes in every language in the world, but as infants, we learn which 40 pertain to our language and simply forget the rest. Beyond learning sounds, infants learn the meaning of words, and this is done through statistical learning and socialization. While it does take many more years to fully analyze and learn one's language, I hope that now I'm all done, that you've learned a little bit more on how infants went from Goo and Gaa to Ma and Pa.